Thank you. And let's do roll call, please.
Great. Starting with Director Goins,
Here.
Director Finn,
Here.
Director Jones,
Here.
Director White,
Here.
Chief Pomey,
Here.
Dan Schwartz,
Here.
and Director Kurtz.
Here. Thank you. Do you have any adjustments to the agenda? Nope. Moving on. Time for public expression. Public is welcome to address the Finance Committee on any matters not on the agenda.
There are no hands at this time.
Thank you. And we'll move it to the Executive Officer's report.
Good afternoon, everybody. I had to check the clock to see if we were in morning or afternoon still. Thank you for the patience as we had a robust conversation during the executive committee. I'll keep my executive officer's report very brief. Looking at the statewide fire predictions for looking at the coming year, we've had a pretty mild April. They're anticipating another mild weather May. And so remember, when they talk about predictions, it's relative to average. So we're looking at the coast at being average potential for significant fire. So May or June's average potential for a significant fire is much different than October's average for significant fire. So even though they're predicting the coast through August to be at average significant potential for fires, it still means we have risk. And then I can see that quickly adjusting should there be a really long extended dry period in June, July, or August. That can really translate into big changes in October. So while we're being predicted as average, that doesn't mean that we're out of the woods. We did have an excellent evacuation drill down in Southern Marin, partnership with Mill Valley PD, Marin County SO, Southern Marin Fire, Marin County Fire. And it was utilizing a very comprehensive evacuation plan that includes a partial contraflow on Blythedale and also turning Hamilton into a two-way street to increase by 33% the amount of on-ramps that are available for people exiting. We are going to be getting an after-action report from Mill Valley when that's conducted. There was a lot of learning. And then a reminder that this is Wildfire Preparedness Week. And in partnership with Marin County Fire, CAL FIRE, and San Rafael, we will be having a large media event on Ridgewood Drive in San Rafael tomorrow at 11 o'clock, focusing on Zone 0 and also our San Rafael San Anselmo fuel reduction zone. With that, I'll end.
There are no hands for comment at this time.
You're not on, Rachel.
We are now actually on to the consent calendar, which we only have one item, the minutes from March 17th.
Move approval.
Second. Third.
All in favor?
Aye.
And we're good.
And
Anyone abstain?
I abstain
All right.
because I wasn't here.
Great. Thank you.
So it looks like we have an approval of the consent calendar with 6 yes votes and 1 abstention.
Great. Thank you. All right. Now we're on to action items.
all right, and that is our annual approval of our annual budget framework. And we do have Lisa Schiffman, our treasurer, online as well to make sure that to fact check me, make sure that everything I'm telling you is accurate. And as a reminder, we brought the framework minus the ops committee, or excuse me, the core program to the finance committee back in March with the recommendation of a 2.7% increase for our budget based on the CPI. And since we have a pretty stable revenue, it's fairly easy for us to predict what our revenue is going to be from year to year. So we've taken actuals from 24-25, added 2.7%, and that comes up with our 25-26 recommendation. As we followed that methodology for setting our budget, we've actually been actual versus estimated, usually 0.5% off. So that methodology works pretty well. So with that 2.7% increase, and if you take a conservative estimate for our interest, that comes up with a $22.8 million budget. If we, and I'm going to scroll past the core program first, and we'll circle back to the core program. We know that 20% of the 22 million goes into defensible space program. So that's going to be 4.45 million. That will be dispersed in 3 payments to our member agencies. As you'll notice, there's no longer a 2% holdback for the abatement program because with the recommendation of the JPA update, we no longer do that because no one was taking advantage of that abatement program. Moving to our next line item, it's 20%, which is the same exact 4.5 million that will be going to our member agencies again in 3 different disbursements. And then our administrative costs. So it's take our 22 million, take 60% of that, which is 13,700,000. 10% of that creates our administrative budget of 1.37 million. And then you see our breakdowns that were presented to the Finance Committee and recommended for approval for the admin budget. And the reason why we're starting our meeting today at 12:30 rather than 12 is a robust conversation that surrounded the core budget. Excellent conversations and discussion. And for the most part, strong support for how the budget was prepared and the work plan was prepared, with remaining discussions surrounding the Fire Safe Marin budget that will continue when we bring it to the Board of Directors next week. So that's why this is a budget framework for you guys to take a look at. Ask me any questions that you may have, but all of the categories that you see here on the spreadsheet is based on our core budget spreadsheets that we have, that Lisa gets our work plan from us. She punches it into the spreadsheet that creates these outputs of the categorized core expenses. So that's why you won't see under public education, you don't see Fire Safe Marin as a specific item, because there's more than just Fire Safe Marin within the public education components. So this aggregates that all. So you won't necessarily see individual project proposals. You just see the accumulation for that budget category. And with that, I'll ask Elisa if I've missed anything or if there's anything we should be adding, and take any questions.
That was great, Mark. I don't have anything else to add.
Thank you for all your work on this. Any questions? No?
I'm new, so I just am not sure if some things are in the annual budget or somewhere else.
Okay.
And so I was just curious about unspent funds from previous years, where if that's reflected or shown.
So when we close out, that's a great question. What we do when we close out specifically the core budget, and for a lot of our projects, you can almost consider them forever projects, right? The evacuation route clearing projects, the shaded fuel breaks. Once we create that infrastructure, it's going to require work on a forever basis, pretty much. So we will budget, let's say for sake of argument, we budget $500,000 for the Greater Ross Valley shaded fuel break. If they are only able to spend $400,000 in this current fiscal year, when we close out the books for the fiscal year, we meet with the central zone, since that's a central zone project, and we ask, do you want the rollover to go into the Greater Ross Valley shaded fuel break, or would you like to move it over to another project within their zone? For the most part, we almost always consistently keep that rollover into the same project. And then that gets approved by the board for that rollover to continue into the next year. There have been times where we have moved it from one category to another. I'll use Chipper Day as an example. In the previous fiscal year, we underspent Chipper Day by $297,000, or we over budgeted by $297,000. So rather than roll that into the next year's Chipper Day, we distributed that back out to the zones relative to their percentage. And so that's how we handle the unspent.
And when the budget is approved and the funding for the different zones is approved, does that money then immediately flow to those zones, or does it flow as the work is done?
It flows as the work is done. And for some of the entities, and I'll use Marin County Fire as an example, they'll have an idea of how much core expenditures that they are going to be responsible to implement. And sometimes they'll actually do their own procurement, pay the invoice, and at the end of the year or close or multiple times during the year, they'll come back to us for reimbursement, and they show the invoices as the backup for their invoice that they're sending us. And if I circle back to your question about the rollovers, if you look at the line that says adjustments rollovers, it's that middle column right here, FY 25. That's where we've captured a rollover from 23-24 into 24-25.
But it's just from one fiscal year to the next. It's not cumulative.
It ends up being cumulative.
Okay.
Good question.
And I have one more question. In the staff report, there was a discussion of that 80% for each zone over 5 years. Now that we're in FY 2025 and Measure C has been in play for 5 years, do you have a sense of whether those benchmarks that benchmark has been met?
We are really close in all 5 zones for that benchmark. And we've met it in Nevada. We're really close in all the other zones. And we anticipate by the closeout of fiscal year 24-25, which is our 5th year, we will meet that benchmark.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Any other questions? Ben?
And there are no hands at this time on this item.
Thank you. All right, then we move on to the reserve conversation.
Well, first of all, we'll need a vote to
vote,
recommend
I'm
approval
sorry.
by the board.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve the budget. Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right,
Now we're on to restricted reserves. So as we had conversations about our work plan and funding for the work plan, and part of the work plan included flexing some extra revenue towards West Marin because of the governor's exemption and the ability for us to get more work done in West Marin than we have in the past. Of course, we wanted to find where we can get that revenue, and Chief Pomey noted that our restricted reserve perhaps might be larger than we need that restricted reserve. And also perhaps this is an appropriate use for this restricted reserve, because one of the bullet point items for the restricted reserve is one-time opportunities. And this can be viewed as a one-time opportunity. As the ops committee worked through the idea about the restricted reserve, Dan Schwartz brought up a great point. We've matured as an organization and we've started to identify what our liabilities really are. And when we look at the restricted reserve, the liabilities really, it should cover the liabilities that are realized by Marin Wildfire. While we had set that restricted reserve on our entire budget, but 40% of that budget gets passed through to our member agencies, which really is no longer a liability for Marin Wildfire. So perhaps we need to reevaluate our restricted reserve, especially with the fact that in the first 5 years, we have not ever needed to use that restricted reserve. Perhaps we adjust, yes. Perhaps we adjust that restricted reserve to reflect our core budget rather than our full $22 million budget. So we had been carrying $3 million in a restricted reserve based on when it was passed that we had a $20 million budget. So if you look at our $22 million budget, its core is 13 million. If you take 15% of that 13 million, that gives you a 2.1 million recommended strategic reserve or restricted reserve. So that's 900,000 that we can now exercise as funding to get more projects out on the ground, because I think we all agree that we should not be sitting on the taxpayers' dollars. We should be putting the taxpayers' dollars to use in a wise way. We shouldn't just be spending to spend, but we also shouldn't be letting it sit in a bank account. So staff's recommendation following the operations committee is to change our policy, reduce our restricted reserve to reflect only our core, make that 50% of that. That opens up 900,000. And through the work plan discussion, staff is recommending 300,000 of that go towards West Marin. We were able to carve out an additional 200,000 in the JPA wide. So that gives us the 500,000 target that we were looking for West Marin. That leaves another 600,000 that we can either hold for a future fiscal year, or perhaps the board may decide to put that in some other category within the fiscal year 25-26. And since Chief Pomey opened this up and Dan Schwartz kind of expanded upon it, I'd love to hear any feedback they have to provide.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mark, for bringing this to this body. You know, there was some very candid conversations at the operations level on how we were going to identify the funding for this potential short window we might have to get some of these projects done in West Marin, and without, you know, asking or sacrificing current projects that are current taking places in each of our areas and taking money from our core projects that are already in place. Just in looking through it, I thought, well, here's maybe an opportunity to use some of these reserves. And then, you know, Dan brought up the point of, as we've matured as an organization, you know, what is our true liability? So, you know, I think it's grown from there. I do want to be, you know, careful in, you know, this additional or remaining 600,000, if this is approved, that we do have some parameters around that, though, and policy, and maybe it's a you know, maybe it's a fund, maybe it's set up for these future opportunities that we don't know, and maybe there's a way to replenish this pot of money to continue to allow us to do these larger scale projects during short windows. So just something for the board to consider, but thank you for bringing it forward, Mark. And I support using the reserve.
Nice suggestion. Dan?
Yeah, so it's sort of two separate comments. I totally support what the chief was just talking about, which I think as we free up some of the reserves, maybe creating an account to supplement and pay for opportunities as they arise is a logical step. You know, when we built the organization at the very beginning, the discussion that we had was, how do we make sure there's money available to deal with projects that the fire chiefs all agree should be a priority, even though we've created this system to distribute the funds back regionally. And so I think this is actually, we've stumbled into an opportunity to build that piece into the financial model. The other thing is, I think this is a first step, because the ops committee just met about this topic over the last 2 weeks. I think this reserve is still too high. You have to take a step back and ask yourself, what do you need a reserve for? And initially, because we didn't know, we just said 15%, right? And we didn't, but to me, we need a reserve for make sure we can make payroll. We need a reserve to make sure anything we've contractually committed the agency to, we can pay for. We don't need a reserve for everything that's in the core. And so I think actually we should take this opportunity over the next several months to nuance this even more. I think the reserve could be much more targeted, and we could free more of this money up to go into. I like the idea of creating a pot for these targeted opportunities that are outside the basic model that we use. And then I did mention to Mark, we also started to understand our liabilities a little better, and we don't really have a proper insurance fund. This reserve's been sort of doubling as an insurance fund. So I do think some of this money probably needs to be parked there in case there are any claims that come up that we need to deal with. Now that we are in a risk pool, we know what our insured retention levels are, our deductible, if you will. So there's some methodology that we can talk about for doing that. But anyway, I think this is a great first step. I think we can even refine this some more and free up more of this money to go into projects.
Not a question, but a comment. I completely agree with both Chief and Dan and their recommendations, but I want to make sure that nothing about these adjustments should imply that we've been hoarding reserves. This is a learning experience for us to find the optimal level. There's no hard and fast rules about what the reserve level ought to be. There are some rules of thumb, but there's nothing in the government code that prescribes how much it should be. So it's a learning experience, and we're making appropriate adjustment, but we've not hoarded reserves in the meantime. Thank you.
I have to chime in because the poor ops committee keeps hearing me talk about this, but I keep using the words infancy and maturity. We've been in infancy and now we are maturing. And when you reach that point in a new organization, you start to realize those initial decisions can be refined. Yep.
Any other questions or comments? Bruce?
Yeah, having just gone through the budget discussion, I can assure all present that there are multiple needs for additional funds every fiscal year. We're just getting started, of course, but there have been suggestions during the year from members in regards to what we're allocating to one item or another. There's been requests for additional grant funds that grants have made that we get for every dollar invested. We get, I think, $15 back. Grants are the best way to educate public. When, if I get a grant and my neighbor says, "What'd you do?" And anyway, so I just want to assure folks that I'm all for thinking about, putting this in a pot and think of it considerately, but there is an ample need to continue to populate what's in this current budget. We could move this money fairly quickly into a very effective use, which I think the operations sections team would support.
I wonder if I could just build on that, Madam Chair. So this year was the first time, in my opinion, I don't know if the chief agrees with me, but the ops committee for the first time really struggled with, we're in a zero sum business, right? Every dollar that goes here for this worthy need is a dollar that's not going there. Up until now, I feel like we've been able to say yes to everybody. And this was really the first year the ops committee had to be a lot more thoughtful about, okay, if the money goes over there, it's not going to go over here. And what's the ramification of that consideration? So I appreciate your point very much.
Absolutely. And we had a very robust conversation around exactly that to ensure that all of our funds are used for our priorities and in the best way. So to really the right time, the right time. So appreciate that. And I do like, we could think about what should that reserve amount be? I know when I was on the school board, it was definitely, the school districts have to do 17% because it's all staffing, right? And so it's a very different type of organization. So it's interesting to think about this one of what we really need to do for the point of the reserve. So that's a good conversation. All right. Any other questions or comments?
I have one comment, just one nuance in terms of the reserves that I don't think I heard mentioned, was that we do have that dry period from July through December before the first property tax disbursement comes in, that we have to pay for all those core expenses before that comes in. So last December, right before we got.
I didn't want to bore everybody today, but I appreciate that the float is a part. And certainly that's why Larkspur carries a 25% reserve. It's not because we need 25%, it's because we have to float the dry period. But I understand. So before we make any commitments, we have to have that discussion too.
All right. But with the current recommendation, we'll takes that into consideration for this.
Exactly.
All right, great. Okay, to public comment on this item?
And there do not appear to be any hands for comment at this time.
Back, if there's a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
I'm double checking my agenda as well.
Okay, good. Okay, and then, committee reports, operations committee.
That'll be me. All right, I think we scared away Todd Cusimano, our vice chair, after staying for such a good long time at our executive committee meeting. The operations committee started meeting in December and we concluded last week. We had to move some dates around. We had one meeting near the end of April, around the 23rd, and then another meeting on the 1st of May. So we had a lot of conversations in a short period of time. And we had, if anybody wants to go back and watch the April 23rd recording, that was a very long, in-depth conversation about a number of topics. And Dan, feel free to let folks know what we talked about if you'd like. But we discussed multiple JPA-wide and zone-specific proposals and projects. But all of those conversations were very fruitful and productive. And then by the time we met again on the 1st, it was a 20-minute meeting. And so we were able to go ahead and move forward and make some decisions there. And I guess that's it for my report. We've been talking in this meeting and in the executive committee meeting in depth about all the things discussed. But if Chief Pomey or Dan want to mention anything, please feel free.
Yep, just huge amount of thanks. It's been a lot of number of meetings, and appreciate all the time everyone's committed to this. So thank you. Hopefully at the end of the day, you'll say, oh yeah, it was smooth this year. All good. So appreciate it. Thank you.
And I'll just note that while the full committee, season of meeting is over, we are discussing potential workshop ideas and other things to keep us engaged and discussing important topics during the off season. So stay tuned for that.
I have a question. Chief Tyler, having retired and having presided over the Ops Committee as president several years, 2 out of 5, I believe, and he was actually president when he retired and replaced. And Mark, I know when you have new directors that you have an orientation protocol.
We do the same with new advisory technical committees. We also do it with new ops committee members where we have an onboarding packet. We run them through the onboarding packet. And when it comes to ops committee and ATC members, then it's a meeting with Ann, myself, and the new member.
Yeah, that's my question. I knew that we had it for new directors, but I didn't understand within the organization with the ops ATC. Thank you so much. I think, the level of professionalism here and attention to detail is commendable. Thank you so much.
And I want to make a comment on what Dan said about the maturation of the organization, and that this was one of the very first times that we were really grappling with the zero-sum budget. And yes, I would love for it to be easy based on your comment, but I don't want it to be easy. It should take work to make a work plan that we are going to be using the taxpayers' dollars to our best benefit. So I anticipate future operations committee meetings are going to continue to grapple with that zero-sum item. And if we ever get to the point where it's easy, then perhaps we're becoming complacent.
Very good point. Thank you. All right. Any other questions, comments? Any agenda items for the future?
Not an agenda item for this, but just for the board members that are here now. Based on the robust conversation we had at exec, we are going to have the board meeting next week start at 2 rather than started at 3.
And maybe do a preview. You could listen to the exec meeting
And
recording.
I will be sending that link to all of our board members.
Please.
All right. Thank you all. I think we are adjourned. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.